afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on for inter-religious harmony and world peace. Self-knowing is sine qua non. For the next 90 minutes, our plan is this. Dr. Sankara Bhagavadpada, who I'll introduce in a moment, will go over our intention as a panel to discuss with you today the lifetime works of J. Krishnamurti, his teachings on self-knowing, and how they can lead and provide a channel for us to come to unity and interreligious harmony. We'll then start a dialogue, an interactive dialogue between the panelist and Dr. Bhagavadpada. We'll be asking him questions that have helped us in our learning and growing, and he will share his insights on our questions, and where our hope is this will also help you to learn more about self-knowing. We'll then open up the floor for Q&A. So we've allowed about 15 or so minutes for you to ask questions of us as a panel, Dr. Bhagavadpada, and so we ask that you hold your questions until the end. Anything that we cannot answer in the time of our session, we'll be glad to meet with you afterwards in the hallway if need. I'd like to introduce the panel to you. First, I'd like to start with Dr. Sankara Bhagavadpada.
Namaste.
Dr. Bhagavadpada is from India. He is a spiritual master and a Vedic astrologer. To my left is Madhusai Devanapalli.
Namaste.
Madhusai is from Kamloops, here in Canada. Madhusai is an electrical engineer. He is a life coach, a yoga therapist, and a former monk. To Dr. Bhagavadpada's left is Dawn Gill. Dawn is from the US. She is a yoga teacher. She is also a business consultant, a financial analyst, and a seeker, like all of us on the panel. Next to her is Lakshmi Kumar. Lakshmi is a software architect and a technical consultant and a spiritual seeker, like I mentioned before. I am Lamore Silas. I am also from the US. I am a yoga therapist, meditation facilitator, retired IT executive, and a seeker. I'll turn the session over now to Dr. Sankara Bhagavadpada.
Namaste to all the seekers and all the learned leaders gathered here on the 125th anniversary of the Parliament of the World's Religions. I'm speaking on behalf of all the panelists. And in this brief introduction, I will endeavor to record our appreciation and deep gratitude to the leaders of the Parliament of the World's Religions, notably to Dr. Robert P. Sellers, the Chair, and to Reverend Dr. Larry Greenfield, the Executive Director, especially because of the extraordinary courage they have shown in standing up to and addressing the timeless and impossible problems of humanity since the dawn of history. Problems which have been exacerbated in modern times because of rapid globalization. Notwithstanding some religious diversity among the panelists, some of us are coming from the Hindu Amanaska Yoga tradition and some others from the American Christian tradition, what is common to all of us is a dispassionate devotion to the lifetime teachings of the illustrious master, Sri J. Krishnamurti, teachings which are centered on the nascent and virgin process of inward flowering through self-knowing. What is common is also created a common ground between all of us, in that all of us are have an overriding concern for the divisive and destructive course of human civilization the world over. The theme of the panel discussion for interreligious harmony and world peace, self-knowing is sine qua non, may sound a little enigmatic in the beginning, but as the panel discussion unfolds, you will see that the many significances which are hidden in the theme, they come rolling out. Now, the panelists have 4 intentions which I now wish to spell out. The first intention of the panelists is to place before Parliament and all the leaders and seekers gathered here that the etiology, the root malaise of all the social, political and religious maladies we see in the macrocosm of our society, that root malaise does not lie in the macrocosm itself, but is deeply concealed and hidden in the microcosm of society, namely in the individual, in particular in the human self. Now, such an etiology calls for a dramatic shift of attention from the glaringly visible macrocosm of society to the very subtle and imperceptible microcosm of society, which is the individual consciousness and the deeply nestled self therein. The second intention of the panelists is to draw the attention of Parliament and all the leaders to the rather disturbing fact that the human self has an unfortunate default setting in that it has got a divisive mentality and a sense of separation in thought and feeling to such an extent that the self often becomes anarchic and develops a proneness to evil. The third intention of the panelists is to place before Parliament and all the leaders gathered here that the lifetime work of the illustrious master, Sri Krishnamurti, which is centered on the whole process of inward flowering through self-knowing, is so potent that if human intention and human intelligence and human awareness are now brought into the picture through the choiceless awareness of what is, then the obnoxious default setting of the human self can be overwritten. And we see that without being able to address the root malaise in the microcosm of society, namely in the human individual, we will not be able to provide any durable solutions to the immense problems of humanity since the dawn of history. Now, the fourth intention of the panelists is to draw the attention of Parliament and all the leaders gathered here to the fact that the lifetime teachings of the Master represent a paradigm shift in the religious sphere. Now, such a paradigm shift has not happened for thousands of years in the religious sphere, and this paradigm shift is to be understood in likeness to the paradigm shift we witnessed in the life and work of Mahatma Gandhi through ahimsa and satyagraha. A paradigm shift because that process of ahimsa and satyagraha never took place in the history of mankind previously. It is also akin to the paradigm shift between from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics and from Newtonian mechanics to the theory of relativity. And if we look around in the world, we see that all over the world, in most of the religions and most of the times, religious leaders and religious institutions have an insularity, have an insensitivity, have unwillingness to address the new challenges which are seen in the macrocosm of society as well as in the microcosm of society. There is an apathy, there is an indifference, there is an unwillingness, there is a torpitude in religious institutions and among religious leaders. In view of that, we appeal to a small portion of the creative minority in the social pyramid, in the religious pyramid, and in the political pyramid to give room to the whole new process of inward flowering through self-knowing, so that if they consider this their moral responsibility and their prerogative to seed and to intentionally seed and to promulgate the paradigm shift, then it is possible that we will change the course of human history. We have not been able to change the course of human history. It is divisive, it's obnoxious, it's ugly. And our suggestion is that there are still a small number of people among the creative minority in the apex of the religious pyramid, the social pyramid, and the political pyramid, a small number of masters who are still not corrupted, and masters who have not succumbed to the current of decay in the macrocosm of our society. Now, as panelists, we know that as we articulate these four intentions and we present before you the various nuances of the theme of the panel discussion, we know that what we do at best here will be to ingenuously plant seeds in the hearts and minds of a few noble seekers, and that we are well aware that humanity may have to wait 20 or 30 generations before we are fortunate to witness the fruition of the tree of humanity's religious maturity, which may happen this time through the lifetime work of the self-abnegating world teacher J. Krishnamurti. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your patience and for your understanding, and request you to kindly follow the panel discussion. Namaste.
So thank you so much for giving this introduction about the theme. My first question is about the first intention that you were talking about, that the social malaise in the society lies in the human self. So the first thing I want to get your opinion is, what is this human self you are talking about?
This human self is ourselves, not as a body, but as a darting energy in consciousness, an energy which is moving, an energy which comes into existence every time we are challenged, and we take an adversarial position in relationship between the self and the other, whether it is in the family, whether it is a relationship between two friends, or even you see that in the relationship between two political leaders and heads of state, you see that the self has got a divisive mentality and a sense of separation. Okay. Now, this energy is a darting energy, like an arrow, it shoots up. It takes the form of jealousy, it takes the form of hatred, it takes the form of resistance and being stubborn and unwilling to see the viewpoint of the other person with whom you are in relationship. Now, this is who we are at one level, because the self is a superficial inner essence in the human consciousness.
Yes.
And this is very different from the core essence in human consciousness, which is our real root nature, but we're not going into that now.
Yes. So the consciousness that we are talking about is basically, we can say, it is there in the form of thought, it is there in the form of feeling, it's there in every emotion, it is there every time. That is the human self you're mentioning.
That is the human self, but what is more significant is, while the human self may be functioning in an untroublesome way in many situations, suddenly it becomes self-conceited, suddenly it develops an anarchic tendency, a rebellious posture, and leading to violence and hatred and so on. So we have to watch that.
How is this human self really formed?
See, this human self has come with the body. And if you look at the entire animal kingdom, you will see that the animals are provided with a self-defensive apparatus.
Yes.
Now, this is part of natural evolution, Darwinian evolution, and I see it as an implantation in the divine architecture of a self-protective mechanism so that the species can survive. You see the quills of a porcupine, you see venom in the fangs of a cobra, and then you see the tusks of an elephant, and you see the powerful claws of vultures, and you see the powerful paws of a tiger. And but man does not have such powerful organs in the body, which is quite vulnerable, and it cannot even face up to the wild actions of the animals. So the divine has implanted another mechanism which can be considered to be a software mechanism, which is a self-defensive mechanism, and that is the self. Now, when it functions within limits, it's not troublesome, but invariably it trespasses the limits and it becomes a very dangerous energy. And this is the etiology of all the problems in human society.
So because it is so sophisticated,
yes,
and it is formed that way.
Yeah, we can't see it so long as we are that.
So it's more like a default setting
Right.
in the human self.
Yes, the default setting is the divisive mentality and a sense of separation in thought and feeling. And because we are in that boat and we are that,
Right.
so we won't be able to discover that. We can discover that only if we begin to observe it as the awareness which observes. Then we will see that there is a default setting to it, that it is anarchic, that it is prone to a divisive mentality.
Right.
All
right.
that.
Right. Okay. So you have postulated this default setting that is given by the divine, if we
Right.
right. So this default setting, we are saying that it is so dangerous, it is so ugly,
Right.
and maybe sometimes evil also.
Of course it
This
is.
and it is a default setting.
Of
So
course it
how
is.
how on what basis have you postulated that it is dangerous and ugly?
Just by observing life, just as Charles Darwin observed the variation of the species as he traveled around the continent of South America.
Right.
And in the same way, you keep on observing life. And if you're fortunate to receive the grace from the illustrious master Krishnamurti, then the senses and the intelligence which is outward turned
Right.
suddenly undergoes a 180-degree shift. It turns inward. And then you have the opportunity for the first time in your life to observe the workings of the obnoxious self. Now, if the shift does not happen, you can never observe yourself.
Okay.
And the shift happens only under certain conditions. And by observing myself, and by observing life in the family, life in society, life in politics between two leaders,
Yes.
I came to this inference that the root malaise is the human self because it's got this troublesome default setting.
Okay.
But there's a good news, we'll come to it later.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a hopeless case, we'll come to it later.
Because the theme says that for interreligious harmony and world peace, that self-knowing is sine qua non.
Right.
So now what is this mysterious self-knowing now? We said
Right.
you have to observe yourself.
Right.
So what is this mysterious self-knowing?
You see, the self-knowing is, you've got to, I told you this energy, the self is not a noun, it's a verb. Now it's a moving thing. Now moving jealousy, moving hatred, moving divisiveness, moving criticism, moving unacceptance of other members of the family.
It comes
Then
and goes.
Then hypocrisy in the family. It's like a monkey which leaps from one branch of a tree to another branch of a tree. Now it happens so suddenly that you will not be able to watch it if the shift has not happened to you.
Okay.
But for those for whom the shift has happened, you can watch it very nicely. And then if you keep on watching that self, then you begin to understand that self. First of all, you identify it, then you understand it. Then it undergoes a spontaneous calming and silencing. And when the calming and silencing happens, the life of the self comes to an end. That's the good news.
Okay. So do you think then this human self feels threatened when it is encountered with the same species of different race, of different culture, of a different ethnic background? People seem to feel very threatened and lot of fear. Should I talk to this person or not? So
Right.
do you think it's this human self feels threatened?
Of course it feels threatened because it's got a certain definition. It defines itself as the body to begin with. So it will do everything in its power in order to protect the body. Then it has got a definition as to who it is in terms of a psychophysical identity.
Right.
Then if anybody threatens that identity, anybody casts an aspersion on you, casts an insinuation on you, then immediately the defense mechanism will be switched on.
Kicked over.
And then you veto that, what other people have sent, that energy has been sent on you.
Right.
And then it functions like this. And it's very easy for it to become anarchic, and it's very easy for it to develop a proneness to evil.
So is this why we can say at the macrocosmic society that we deeply feel we cannot really mingle, we cannot really open to the other person, to the other race, to the other color, to other gender,
Right.
right? So we feel threatened. Is it because of this human self and looking only outward at the human self and not looking inward and deeply? Is this why the feeling of fear is?
See, the self is a superficial inner essence. Now it is driven by sensory perceptions and various beliefs and convictions. It's driven. That's the petrol. And that's the energy which gives the life of the self and makes it move and makes it dart forward.
Okay.
Now, when the life of the self has come to an end and your identity has shifted from the superficial inner essence to the core inner essence, which the Hindus call the Atma,
Right.
Which is our divine center, and which Christians call the Christ consciousness, then you are no more driven by sensory impressions. You have nothing to do with your beliefs and convictions because they are not feeder channels to the life of the self. Then you function from that divine center, and then to perceive the unity of life is the easiest thing for you. It's the easiest thing, but it's not a belief.
Right, right. So because today the world, the way we are living in a world where people are always looking outward for a solution. If there is a problem, socially, individually, they're always looking outside for an answer.
Right.
And expecting somebody else, some guru or somebody to give them the solution and answer.
Right.
Quick results,
Right.
and they want instant solutions.
Right.
So we live in this kind of world where you're talking about Master J. Krishnamurti has spent almost 7 decades, a lifelong journey into this self-knowing.
Right.
You have spent through Amanaska Yoga, where self-knowing is a very important component,
Right.
and you have spent your lifetime doing that work. So whereas we have this world, people looking for instant answers and quick solutions, so how can we bridge this gap between looking inward, because now you're saying that don't look outward if there's a problem, if there's a crisis, stop looking outward and turn inward and start looking inward. And then what are we seeing? The dangerous and that ugly self.
Right.
And start looking at that ugly self and keep going deeper.
Right.
So, but that is something that is takes time. So how do we bridge this gap?
See, you have been brainwashed and you have been put under a wrong belief system whereby you think you're going to get instant solutions. Nothing of that kind. It's just a lovely illusion in which you are living. And the religions and various spiritual organizations and spiritual masters may have fed you on this because they have a self-interest in this as well.
Right, right.
And you've got to crack through this illusion. And when will you do this? Now you will do this under certain conditions.
Right.
And we'll go into it later on. And because this is the default setting, this is a superficial inner essence.
Right.
And it is possible to overwrite on the default setting,
Right.
which happens under certain conditions.
Right.
And then you're free of the disease once and for all. It's gone forever.
So
There's no more self for you.
no more self.
No more self, no.
Because the global ethic, which is basically it recognizes
Right.
this social malaise that is happening in the macrocosm society,
Right.
and they are really seeking and they are looking for a very durable solution.
Absolutely.
So your etiology, the root cause of all that social malaise, you're saying is the human self.
Of course.
And one must stop looking outward and begin to start looking inward and keep going deeper inside into that.
Right.
So is it
That is right.
so remediable? Is it so immutable that it can be resolved by just looking inward?
Of course. That is the whole point. You see, you look at millions of people all over the world. Now, they are on a traditional, conventional path in mainstream society,
Right.
or in slightly subsidiary streams, where they have not been shown other options and other avenues of inward flowering. Now, because they have not been shown other options and other avenues, and it is too hard to come upon this paradigm shift,
Right.
because the masters, it has come through the master,
Yes.
and such a paradigm shift rarely happens for humanity.
Right.
And so we need to get this message across to the suffering people,
Yes.
because they should know that there is an alternative and it is possible to end the suffering once and for all. Right.
So, but this self, this human self, is so divisive. It's so separative.
It is.
So, how can one really get into the place of real freedom and joy by just looking inward?
You see, freedom and joy will come when you keep walking in the boulevard of self-knowing and you go long enough.
Long enough.
You go long enough, yes.
Because initially the self looks very horrible, very dangerous,
Yes.
and very divisive.
Right, it is.
But as you go along,
Long enough.
and you're saying that it,
Yeah.
it can
and
be
the
understood.
paradoxical news, which none of us can digest, is the scoundrel of the self, he becomes the divine saint. You're not going to believe this? Huh? Adi Shankara discovered this. He said, Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. The Jiva only is Brahman.
Yes, you are the divine.
Tattvamasi. Yeah, you are that.
Right.
But under what conditions is this true? This is true under conditions of perfect purification of the self. The self has to be purified. And the purification happens by watching, without criticism, without condemnation, without judgment, without wanting to get rid of it, without ideals.
Okay.
Then you're getting here. Then you're coming to the end of the boulevard.
So you can't hang on to anything.
No, you can't. You have to be serious.
So, in other words, what religions talk about is basically before you even discover God or divine or whatever, one needs to actually discover oneself.
Of course.
Otherwise, there is no other way.
Of course.
Because only through that discovery.
Of course.
So, first looking at that ugly self and the dangerous self,
Right.
and going deep into that boulevard, and then reaching to that place
Towards the
Yes.
divine. Now, they will never tell you how to deal with the monster which you are.
Right.
Right. Right.
So one has to really go into that journey. So now, for the sake of clarity, we have discussed more about the human self. Sake of clarity, can you just share a little bit about what is this Atma or the Christ consciousness or the divine consciousness?
Right. So, as I said, the good news is that the scoundrelly self graduates and matures into the divine saint
Right.
and the sage. Now, it happens only through purification.
Right.
So, now as you keep on watching and watching, go to the end of the boulevard of self-knowing, then what happens is the self is initially kicking and rebelling, anarchic,
Yes.
and unwilling to have, it's more like a wild beast actually.
Creates a lot of conflict.
Right. Tremendous amount of conflict.
Conflict.
Because it does not know how to deal with any problem in life. That is the self.
But it gives,
It will create all the problems,
Yes.
but it cannot solve any problem.
and it will tell, I also have a solution for it.
Right? Right? So now, when you go to the end of the boulevard
Yes.
of self-knowing,
Yes.
then you will find that happens because of the calming and silencing of the self. Then imperceptibly, your identity will shift from the obnoxious and ugly self to the divine center, the Atma, the Christ consciousness. It will shift so imperceptibly that you won't even know that you have become innocent. Because the Atmic center is nothing but innocence.
So what one has to, first of all, move from moving outward, they have to move inward.
Right.
Then it's not enough if you just turn inward.
Right.
You have to go through the boulevard.
Right.
And that is also not enough. You have to go to the end
Right.
to really connect with that Atma, the Christ
Right.
consciousness.
Right. If you see the Yoga Sutras, for example,
Yes, sir.
they say that the goal of yoga, which is Kaivalya, will easily happen depending on the passion and the intensity of the seeker. Now, if you're casual, if you're lukewarm, then you'll be a non-starter.
Right.
Right? Now, if your whole world has collapsed and it has turned upside down, then you jolly well become serious, right?
That is part of, yes. That's part of the process.
Yeah. Then you become serious, you apply yourself, you devote yourself, you develop the dedication, and then it's going to happen. But there's nobody to show you how this happens. So you will continue in the mainstream society, half alive, half dead. Because the self also gives pleasure. So, and pain is a concomitant of pleasure. So, but you don't know what to do with pain. You're running after pleasure all the time. So you live in that conflict of pleasure and pain, and you die like that.
So talking about this whole journey of self-knowing in women, Don would like to discuss some more things.
Okay.
Don, if you could discuss on.
Thank you, Madam Sai. In human history, in all countries, all religions, for centuries upon centuries, women have been suffering indignities, inequality, and lack of freedom from male dominance.
Right.
It's even down to a skewed perception or interpretation of the Word of God. So are women held to be spiritually inferior beings in comparison to men?
Is that the question?
Yes.
You see, that is not an explicitly spelt out thing in mainstream society. But what is expected of women is obedience to men, because they don't want to have trouble, because they have a self. And if you want to have equal freedom, equal to what men have, then the self of the man becomes insecure. So the insecure self clamps authority on you, puts you in a box, and says you are inferior, and you've got to conform, you've got to be obedient, and you've got to do all these things. That is how the gender bias has developed. It is, the etiology is the same. It goes back to the self of man. And the self of man, all through history, you see the strong oppressing the weak. Not just man oppressing woman. The strong people oppressing the weak people, the strong nation oppressing the weak nation. It's a very pathetic story of humankind.
So why has there been this disparity between men and women in religion?
Strictly speaking, it should not be. But as I said, even religion is controlled by the males of the species, and they want power, they want authority, they do not want dissent, and they do not want you to suggest something. They know everything. So the self is anarchic. The self is conceited. And the self is always drunk on power. That's why it's dangerous. And the global ethic is very, very clear. They say that the self has got a proneness to evil. They are not trying to put the whole thing under a carpet. And they are saying something extraordinarily beautiful, the global ethic. They are saying earth cannot be changed for the better without the consciousness of man transforming. It's a signal verdict. So they know that the microcosm is not such an insignificant thing, that really the trouble lies there, but they don't know how to go about it.
Right.
Okay? And they are sitting in the watchtower, and they're looking for what people are talking in these conferences, and they want to learn. And they're very, very intelligent people. They are the leaders of the parliament of the world's religion. They are the creative minority in the religious sphere. They are at the apex of the religious pyramid. From the watchtower, they are watching. They know that everything which is happening in the religions is distasteful, and this is not a thing in the religions which can be accepted by the Atmic center in man. No.
So there's been recent legislation and purported women's rights, really
Right.
globally, when you think about it. And it still seems that women are being disrespected, not equally paid, disregarded. And I ask, is there a difference in these new worldly opportunities and the way we need to look at things?
I mean, you know this as a professional. You are a professional and you worked in church organizations and you're a financial consultant. You know that even if we make legislations and we provide outer empowerment for women, they have all the privileges and they have all the advantages which the males of the species may have in a certain office environment. Now, there will be very, very subtle discrimination, very, very subtle domination, and you know that you suffer. So while outer empowerment has come to pass, the inner empowerment is not addressed at all, much less resolved. Because there's a whole lot of suffering here, whole lot of suffering. There's suffering in the family, suffering in society, suffering in all religious institutions. And in fact, there are many, many sessions at the Parliament of World's Religions 125th anniversary, where there is one panel discussion where 5 women rabbi are talking about their plight, because they're rabbis and they're custodians of the Jewish religion. And they go by the book and they know that the gender bias is there. So people are talking, we're very much aware of this. And the problem is not resolved, it's there from the dawn of history.
Absolutely.
It's not resolved.
And people are only looking outward because they are not looking inward.
Superficial solutions, legislation, hypocritical brotherhood, then face-saving diplomacy, face-saving devices, then diplomacy. Now, it's so laughable. Are these solutions? They're so fragile and phony.
So do we perceive a significant difference in the teachings of J. Krishnamurti and the teachings of world religions?
As I'm saying, there is a paradigm shift because the religions are divine-centric and divine-obsessed. All the religions, with the exception of Buddhism, which is an agnostic religion. So it is supposed to have, instead of divine obsession, it is supposed to have another obsession, namely an obsession with nirvana. But sadly, the rot has set into Buddhism as well, because they do not have the obsession with nirvana, but superficial, lesser steps have gained more prominence in order to pander to the appetites, the shallow appetites of the rank and the file of people. So the actual teachings and the sublimity and the majesty and the grandeur of the Buddha, they're not visible anymore, even in Buddhism.
All that.
Rarely, somewhere if you go deep into China, deep into Japan, you may come across a monastery, a Buddhist monastery, where they are dealing with enlightenment, with nirvana. But in other places, you find things like mindfulness, you find things which will be pleasing to the obnoxious and ugly self.
It is all the act of the self.
All the act of the self. And you've got to find out the whole thing. You should not be getting this from me. You've got to do your own homework.
So you have said there's 3 levels in the existence of man. And that being the case, how are women and men different? Because their bodies are different, but
Right.
are there the 3 levels of a woman in the existence different? Is the
Right.
Atma different?
The Atma is certainly not different. The bodies are different. The body of the woman and the body of man, they're completely different. And the selves are different. And the selves are different because the self of the woman is more insecure because she's a mother, she's a nurturer, she has to protect young life. So she demands willy-nilly greater security for the body and for the self, which man does not require. So the self is more insecure. And because she's a mother and a nurturer and brings up life, now love is second nature to her. So there is an implantation of love in all womanhood. Which implantation of love is not there in the males of the species. So that love has is an additional ingredient in the self of the woman. So the body is different, the self is different, but the Atma, how can it be different? Because there are not 6.5 billion Atmas for 6.5 billion people. There is only one Atma for 6.5 billion people. Only one Atma. That's the divine center.
One Christ consciousness.
Only one Christ consciousness. So there you have the unity of life. There you run into the common ground between you and the divine, and it's imperceptibly you land there with the calming and the silencing of the self, and that is the ground of innocence. And this is the innocence that Adam lost by eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. It's there in Genesis. Now you got to get back there. Now, if you're not getting back there, and you're getting back somewhere else, which is an intermediate station, all your life's problems will remain as they are. You've got to get as far back as the beginning. And then there are no problems anymore. And it cannot happen for one or two, it has to happen for every one of us. So the individual becomes very, very important. And the individual is the world is the individual. It's not that the individual is puny and tiny and that the world is immense and large, no. So the whole world is in us, and we have to, through our every thought of ours, through every thinking of ours, every act of ours, we have to show this responsibility that we create a better world.
So you're asking us to look in, to become knowing of ourselves, self-knowing.
Right.
So as long as there's religious authority, can there be self-knowing?
No, there cannot be. How can that be? It's a thing which the mighty established religions, world religions, and the religious leaders, they are not going to like my verdict. Now, so long as there is authority, so long as you're encased in a prison of beliefs, then, like your thought and your inquiry is like a tennis ball. So all that the tennis ball can do is bounce between the 4 walls, and it cannot break out of that prison. So all that you can do is think within the limitations, within the boundary, and then that will not get you freedom. And there is authority because the religions have a vested interest. You need to be followers so that the gargantuan religious empires may survive. So you are the meat for the sustenance of those ugly empires, religious empires. And so
it could also be that they want to preserve the traditions. They're stuck in tradition.
No, but they don't understand what that tradition means because it's very clearly, it's self-evident. You just look at the events which are happening in every religion. And just by repeating the Bible, just by repeating the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible and the Quran or any other book, you don't sustain the religion. You have to come here to the Atmic ground to know what religion is. In your present condition, religion is for you a matter of belief and faith. So the entire Parliament of the World's Religion is talking too much about faith. Now, from my point of view, faith is a very rudimentary milestone in the journey towards the divine. It's a very rudimentary milestone, and all the religions, what they've done is make you go to sleep at the milestone of faith and belief. And in order to go all the way to the divine center, you've got to be inquiring like the saints and the sages of all the religions were inquiring. They were contemplative. It was a priority for them. And for you, materialism is a priority, and religion is a crutch, is an aid for you to succeed more grandly in your material quest. So you have a secret agenda, the religions have a secret agenda, so both go to hell.
Both are functioning from the same self.
Obviously.
Nobody wants to go deeper.
Watch what's happening in the world.
Right.
So
There's no answers.
So as you know, I was born into a Christian family, grew up in a Christian family. Part of my career has been working in Christian institutions, Southern Baptist churches actually,
Right.
as a church administrator, as the church accountant, and as the human resource professional, in-house expert. So why I say that is I know firsthand about the creative minority or the dominant minority. And then the question that I have for you is, how can the process and teachings of J. Krishnamurti help us with our religious dominance, I suppose?
You see, you've got to, in order to become self-knowing, you've got to overthrow religious authority. Now, so long as there is a religious authority, you will be a very shallow follower, and you're already asleep. And you are actually a pilgrim, like Canterbury's Tales. You are a pilgrim going towards the divine, and you've gone to sleep at the milestone of belief and faith. Now, this is very advantageous for religious institutions, and some of them may know that you are sleeping, and even if they know that you are sleeping, they won't wake you up, because if you wake you up, you will walk away from the religion, because then you become a light unto yourself.
Right.
Right. So you don't look for the light outside yourself. You look for the light within yourself. And what is the verdict of the Messiah Jesus? The kingdom of God is within you, right? Now, is it in Vatican? Or is it in any other religious institution? Tell me. No, obviously not.
So that is actually the job or the responsibility or the function of a religion is to actually help you to look inward.
Of course. That is the function, of course.
Not depend on anybody.
Of course. That's the function.
So that is like J. Krishnamurti's self-flowering.
Inward
As
flowering.
you look inward flowering.
Yeah. And you see, once you set aside this authority, if you don't set aside the authority, what will happen is you will have an ideal. Let's take a concrete example, that a certain human being has too much lust, or he is telling lies constantly in his life. Now, the church or the temple or the monastery, they give you an ideal that you should be truthful and that you should not be lusty and that it's a sin. But the divine architecture has made you lusty. So now the religious institutions and the religious masters, they have no sensible guidance to give you as to how you deal with this incorrigible lust which you've got in your life. So as I said in the introduction, they do not have any creative solutions for new challenges and new problems which are surfaced in macrocosmic society and in microcosmic society. They are intellectually, morally, spiritually bankrupt.
So the best option is they just say suppress it.
Suppress it, and that's not going to work. And then you develop a sense of guilt and a sense of sin,
Right.
and you've got to live with that burden,
Right.
and you cannot be happy living with that.
Or find some kind of a distraction so you don't have to deal with it.
Right.
So
Right.
those are not the right solutions.
Right. You start. They'll ask you to pray, but there is no turning inward, and there is no honesty, and there is no admission of the fact that you've got a very difficult energy to deal with.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
But if you go to individual masters in the various religions, you will find that they offer much, much better solutions than what the institutionalized religions are offering.
Yeah.
They are more decrepit.
Because over 10,000 years, no church has asked us to look inwards.
Exactly, and there are great masters in every religion, and you have to seek them out. You have got to be, and if you're very, very sincere and you're a real seeker, you will get them. Now the fact is, you're lukewarm, you're not serious, you're not sincere, so you wallow in the gutter.
And even not only religious leaders, Guruji, even some outside people who are outside the religion, even those teachers and leaders also are looking for a following.
Of course.
And they are not really asking one to look inward and making them
No,
independent.
they're not concerned about you. Please take note of that. They're concerned about themselves. They're not concerned about you.
They're not
your
thinking, how can I
saviors.
grow?
Exactly. They're not your saviors. Take note. Don't be dumb.
Or even if they started off concerned,
Yeah.
as they get bigger and bigger,
Ah.
or if they've built an empire, let's say,
Right.
then they start to do things to sustain that empire.
Yeah, the power of intoxication. You see, you get intoxicated by success, and by the power of wealth, and by the power of name and fame, and then that's the beginning of the end. You know that.
I just want to get back to that point we were just talking. You know, religions really at an individual level. Religions seldom address negative emotions. You know, like, you know, as a passing thought. You know, we all experience, you know, hatred, jealousy. You know, lustful thoughts. It's a passing thing. It's always been there with us since we are born, till we die. And religions, you know, they never really address it. In a proper sense. They always try to either suppress it, ask us to suppress it, or introduce a sense of a guilt, right, or a sin. So, for example, you brought up the issue of lust. You know, it's something that a lot of people try to tackle with, and religion almost never addresses it.
Of course, because it does not know how to deal with it.
Right, so they condemn it. They teach us to suppress it.
Right.
So do you think the religions have failed individuals in this sense?
See, somewhere the religions have succeeded to a certain extent, but it is not a substantial extent. But if you see by and large, what you do see in the world is a certain stagnation, and there is sterility, there is an insularity, and in fact, in many cases, the religious authorities are themselves responsible for inciting religious wars. What do you say to this? Because you are in a position of power, you are not the creative minority anymore, you have become the dominant minority. Now, as has happened throughout history, we have had good leaders and bad leaders, and a bad leader will mislead the people, will mislead humanity. A good leader is a benevolent energy. He will lead you in the right direction. And religious leaders have themselves created religious wars. What do you say to that? That is, of course, at the macrocosmic level. But coming to the microcosmic level, and you create a gigantic empire, and to sustain that empire, all your energies will go into sustaining that empire, gargantuan empire. And then you cannot really be concerned about the welfare of the people who come to you for help and for sorting out the difficulties. And they are not your focus. And therefore, they are left to the wolves of fate. So they don't know how to solve these problems. So millions of human beings just live in conflict and perish in conflict.
It appears to me what you're saying is that as time goes on, religion should start evolving, is what you're saying.
Of course,
There
now
has to be room for evolution in a religion.
look at the sciences, look at the religions. Now, go back to 16th century when religious authority was vetoed through the age of enlightenment and the age of Renaissance,
Right.
and then the sciences flowered. The sciences are very creative, Every year, look at the Nobel Prizes, look at the inventiveness, look at the freedom in thinking. And the religions are dogmatic, they are sterile, they are ugly. Because you go on repeating somebody else's words. Now, is that your discovery? What is your discovery? Tell me. Is there one sutra, one religious principle which you discovered as an insight in your meditation? Tell me that. Why don't you make that the teaching? Instead of all the time coming from the book, you're just parroting out what is there. And by parroting out what is there, does it become truth? Should you not help the people to actually come to the divine center, whereby the religion comes alive in their consciousness? Because the meaning.
But if you try to, give that room for evolution, the religions say that God's word is immutable, right? You can't just, change something, is what they
It's
say.
a tall claim. You see, it's like saying that Newton's word is immutable. Now, after Newton, we had Einstein, who came up with different insights. And Newtonian mechanics failed at high velocities. So, immutable, if you say God is immutable, that's the perception of one prophet, that there are a million prophets in the world. How can you make that the absolute truth? It's a relative truth. It's the perception of one sage. In Hindu India, you have the Upanishads. You have 108 Upanishads. No Upanishad agrees with any other Upanishad. Because these are the insights of a sage. Because you have tremendous intellectual freedom to inquire and to understand and to digest and to present the truth in your own way. You got the freedom. And without the freedom, will you flower at all? Tell me. Are you going to flower? No, obviously not.
So, at an individual level, like in what circumstances do you see that there'll be a reckoning in somebody's life that they see that they need to take self-knowing in a much serious fashion?
All right. In my life, see, I'm 70 years old, and I've been doing this work from my 33rd year. Very silently, very quietly, not making noise, not wanting to build a spiritual empire, very anonymously in the spirit of the illustrious master Krishnamurti, for whom anonymity is very important. Because where there is no anonymity, then the self becomes self-aggrandizing. Then you see all the rot which is happening in the world. What was your question?
My question is, in what circumstances?
Right, okay, got it. Now you see, I have seen that there are a very minuscule number of human beings who by divine architecture are seekers and yogis, and they get into the pursuit of the divine, the pursuit of the righteous life, the pursuit of truth, and they give up everything. They give up their wealth, they give up their education, they give up their family life, give their married life, and go in search of the divine. Now you know from the life of the sages and the saints that they are in that category. Now for them, there is a portal, they can enter into the kingdom of self-knowing, and there will be the dawn of self-knowing. Now there is a second portal for those people who have had visitation of misfortunes, where your whole world turns upside down, and all the things which you amassed and which were a sheet anchor for you, the whole thing is taken away from you. There are a number of examples in the Bible. The book of Job, you have the example where Job loses everything, and then a portal opens for you when you are hit by those misfortunes. Now only then you can come to the divine. Please understand. Otherwise, your coming to the divine is shallow, is superficial, is very regrettable.
Selfish.
Is selfish. Okay, because it's just by a belief, just by a faith. Now, what for do you have that faith? What for do you have that belief?
Or fear.
Or fear, yes.
To fulfill some desires.
To fulfill some desires.
Or a promise of heaven.
Inability to face life, to face the uncertainties of life.
Right.
So it's a very shallow gate through which you're coming to the divine, to the Father in heaven. Now, when you're hit by this misfortune, then you have an opportunity to come into the kingdom of self-knowing. That's the second portal. Third portal is for all the people who cross 60 or 65 years of life, then the attraction and the fascination of sensory life and sensory gratification falls away. It just falls away. You're no more enamored of that. And then you start asking philosophical questions. Who am I and who is God? And how should I build my life? And a whole new inquiry begins for you. after you're 60 or 65, but it happens so imperceptibly that if you're not very aware and awake, you may not even realize that a shift has already happened. Now, for those people for whom a shift has happened, 60, 65, for them the third portal. Now, then the journey towards the divine actually begins.
So in addition to these three portals, which is basically the being a seeker right from the beginning, from birth or whatever, and something hit and you became a seeker. The second one, which you said, is distress or deep suffering, misfortune has to hit you. And the third one you're saying is somebody after 65 must start seeking. In addition to these three, could there also be seekers or other portals also where seeking can happen, and then the journey into the self-knowing can be initiated?
Definitely. I'm saying for everybody the path is different. You cannot massify the paths and say all of you walk on that path, because each of us is unique. Each of us is an incarnation of the divine. Each of us is God wearing the mask of a human being.
Right.
And you've got to rip it off. Now that's our journey.
But
That's
they have to
my
travel to get to that.
Of course, that's my journey, that's your journey. And your journey will be different, my journey will be different. Now, the journey will commence only if we are serious. Right. If you are sleeping at the milestone of belief and faith, it's not starting.
Right. Right. I just want to shift gears a little bit here, and we were talking more about the individual, but let's say that at the macrocosmic level of the society,
Right.
How do you see that the same self-knowing that we've been discussing so far becomes capable of resolving conflicts at the macrocosm of society?
Okay, we will take the following situation to begin with. You have two world leaders. Let's say President of America and President of Russia, or the head of state of China, something like that. Now they're meeting in an international summit, G7 summit or something like that. They're meeting, and they have a business to transact. It's a very serious matter because they represent the life and consciousness of billions of people on this side and on this side. Now listen carefully. Now either the self of President A can dialogue with the self of President B, and don't forget that the self is obnoxious, and the self is jinxed.
Yes.
Don't forget that.
Yes.
Or the divine center in President A dialogues with the divine center in President B, and the two divine centers are not two centers but only one center.
It's all one.
Right.
Is God in both. Now, if they have come home to the divine center and they're rooted in the Christ consciousness or in the Atmic country, then what they will do as presidents and heads of state will only be welfare not only for their nation but for the whole world. Otherwise, there will be glorified, sanctified, self-centered thinking, each president working for the selfishness of his country. Right?
So it's not just at the individual level, but
No.
it has repercussions.
All the way up to the apex of the political pyramid.
Right. Right.
So the same thing can be happen even in the social pyramid,
Of
and
course.
even in the religious pyramid.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Because when I am working and I am helping, I help people at the microcosmic level,
You and I are
individuals,
doing it at the
individual
microcosm.
level.
Right.
So when these religious leaders are interacting,
Right.
and it will be coming from the pyramid, from the
Right.
top down,
Absolutely.
and the energy will be following that way.
Right.
So creativity can form, and creative answers can come out from that.
Yeah, but you see in history, any number of tyrants in history, the tyrants of history, they have taken humanity in a completely negative direction. You see so many examples of tyrants in history.
Right.
So these leaders can either take you in a benevolent way or they can take you in a malevolent way. And they have such immense power because everybody has to fall in line and has to follow. So if they're not self-knowing, then it's a misfortune for the world.
So for the sake of the audience here, now maybe we should talk about the creative minority. I think you mentioned that earlier on. What it means.
What it means is you look at the solar system. Let's take the solar system. The sun is at the center, and all the planets and the asteroid belt, they are in orbital motion around the center. And similarly, in human society, if you think of human society as a pyramidal structure, then there are creative leaders at the top, the heads of state. If you take politics, then the president of a country, the prime minister of a country. Now he takes important decisions. He is the sun. And the other people, the movement of life in others is around that. Now, the creative minority in every society, in every age, have always given direction to humanity. But in times of disintegration, the creative minority degenerates and it becomes dominant minority, which means they get disconnected from the Atmic center. They get disconnected from the Atmic center, from the Christ consciousness,
Yes.
and they come back to the life of the senses. This is what happens in times of trouble for any society. And then they become bad leaders. They lose their charisma, and the people will be disobedient. They won't follow them. They will be dissenting, and then they become the dominant minority. Then they control the masses through force and through manipulation and through threats and so on. And an unfortunate thing happens.
I'd like to bring up the topic of inclusion pertaining to shifting gears here again.
Go on.
Pertaining to Native Americans and the First Nations people of Canada. And although at the superficial level, the government, we've come quite far. The government has passed quite a bit of legislations. But there's always that feeling of victimhood and aggressor, right? So the victims, not being able to forget the past, and the aggressors don't want to revisit the past. They don't want to talk about it. Now, in the light of self-knowing, what is the modus operandi for the emancipation of both the victim and the aggressor?
See, this is a very long, drawn-out process because we have created a lot of negative karma. It's happened all through history. The strong people oppressing the weak people, and the etiology goes back to the human self. And the First Nation people, for example, or the American Indians, for example, they're an aggrieved lot, and they have a whole lot of suffering. And they don't know how to deal with that suffering because the way has not been suggested to them. And they don't know, actually they are in the darkness. So what they do is they take refuge in their religious tradition and in the religious practices. Now, when you take refuge in your ancient traditions, ancient practices, that will certainly give you some amount of solace, but it does not eradicate the disease of sorrow. It's more important to eradicate the disease of sorrow, like the complete eradication of cancer. And that's a more arduous task, and that has to be addressed. And similarly, the oppressors who are very strong, they may be living a happy-go-lucky life, without any compunction, without any conscience. And you've got to make them more conscientious, make them turn inward. Not all of them will turn inward so long as life is happy. Only when life becomes bitter and horrible, the shift will actually happen.
Right.
And then through those one or two individuals, a chain reaction will start for a better chapter in human history. But there's a whole lot of homework for the exploited people, the First Nation people, the American Indians, and similarly all the people who have suffered the ethnic cleansing in Myanmar.
Right.
And in Sri Lanka, for example, the Tamils were driven out. That's a very painful thing. And many of them have come to Canada for refuge, for sanctuary. And it's a very painful thing. And it will take a long time. It needs, we need tremendous dedication. And we need to, Canada is an extraordinary country. I call it the Divine Mother, Canada. We're looking at the Jyotish chart. Because it's Cancer ascendant with a strong moon aspecting the ascendant. And very compassionate, very caring. But through care and compassion, you make outward legislation. And you've got to attend to the soul. Now that's a very arduous process. And you've got to begin with self-knowing. And people have to work on it on a 10-year project, 20-year project, 30-year project. Yes. It has to be done in a very concerted way.
Very long term.
Long term. And
So on a personal note, you're really passionate. I can see the passion. How did you get so deeply involved in Master J. Krishnamurti's inward flowering through self-knowing?
see, I happen to have a direct contact with the master from my very young age, from the age of 5, because my mother was studied in one of the Krishnamurti schools. She knew the master from the age of 6. And the master, Sri Bhagavan, initiated me very profoundly into the waters of self-knowing. and I was 21 at that time. Now I'm 70. It's been a very long journey, and very long journey. And you've got to put aside your materialistic life at some point for this really to move forward. Now, if you hang on to that and you want to have God in one hand and mammon in the other, you're not going to have both. Very long journey it is.
Right.
So,
And I want to inspire everybody to go on that long journey.
and it will be very interesting also, the journey.
Of course,
Very interesting.
that's where the life stuff is.
Yes.
Right? Otherwise, it's a monotonous existence, no creativity. And,
Talking more on the religious side and discussing on that, Lamore wants to discuss more from that perspective.
Like Don, my upbringing has been in the Christian faith.
right.
So a lot of my questions are
Right.
coming from that perspective.
Okay.
So with all of the various religions and all of our either individual efforts or collective efforts towards unity, we still have not eradicated division in the world between religions and societies and peoples, colors, races, religions, and even sexes. So I know that you said earlier that for self-knowing to occur, we have to be serious and tend to it daily. We also need, for unity, for us to be serious about the removal of labels of I am Christian, I am Muslim, I am Hindu. So how can the teachings of Sri Krishnamurti and the process of inner flowering through self-knowing help us to set those labels aside and to begin to look at each other as ourself?
Okay. Now, first of all, you're talking of division.
Yeah.
And you're saying that religions are not helpful in eradicating division. Now, I want to say something which can be more hurtful, and we have to say it because all of us have signed the global ethic. It says that you should not speak lies,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But we should not hurt anybody by speaking. So we are going to speak our truth very politely and kindly. Now, the religions actually create the division. In India, they say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world is one family. That's the Vedic ideal. But when you belong to Zoroastrian religion, the Sikh religion, the Buddhist religion, Hindu religion, Christian religion, and Islam, then you're told you're so and so, you're so and so. Now, these are superficial definitions, and you have not discovered your religion. That's my thesis. Now, to discover your religion, you've got to go beyond belief and faith. Now you're at the milestone of belief and faith, and you're not become a Christian contemplative like Bernadette Roberts, right?
Yes.
You know her life, right?
Yes.
Now you've got to become like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, like that. You've got to get into that quest, and as you come to the divine center through the whole process of self-knowing, you come to the divine center, then you find that your real definition is that you are the divine center. You are defined by the Christ consciousness, by the Atma. And where you run into common ground, you and the divine, you run into common ground, and you strictly cannot draw a line saying this side is human existence, that side is divine existence. You can't do that. That's why in the Upanishads they have Tattvamasi, you are that. Now, you've got to not make this into a belief, but you've got to discover the whole thing. And it's a very long process.
Yes.
And when you come all the way, go all the way through the boulevard of self-knowing and come to the Christ consciousness or the Atmic center, then you will find that your religion becomes immediately and spectacularly revealed to you. Not only your religion, all religions become revealed to you very easily just by reading a book. And then immediately you are in sync with those masters, those prophets, those saints, those sages, because you have done your homework. Now, without doing your homework, the religion is a feather in your cap. It's a definition of yourself. It is how the self defines itself, and so and so. Now, in that is implicit the division between you and a person who belongs to some other religion. In that is the seed of evil. Right.
Yes.
Now, you've got to be so serious. You've got to be so perceiving, and you've got to be tremendously honest with you to make all these discoveries. And you can make them when you get deep enough into the boulevard of self-knowing. And then you will understand your religion inside out. right? You'll understand religion inside out, but you will not belabor the point that I am a Christian, I am a Muslim, I am a Hindu. That becomes that does not become your definition. Okay? Then you see everybody as an incarnation of the divine. Okay? Whatever their appearance may be, whatever their culture may be, whatever their language may be, whatever their lifestyle may be, they are incarnations of the divine. And it will be a discovery which you will make. And it is after you make this discovery that brotherhood becomes a self-evident truth and not an ideal. Prior to that, brotherhood becomes a fragile ideal which can be broken like a glass falling down and breaking any moment. Slightest insinuation given to you will take your cudgels. You see this happening in the world.
All the time.
Watch closely. You see it happening. Day in and day out in the press it is there. So, according to me, humanity is in the kindergarten of the spiritual life. Because we are drunk on material pleasures and material success and on name and fame and all that kind of rot. And unless we turn away from that, we are not going to understand what the founders of the religions actually taught and the life that the sages and the saints lived.
And to enjoy the essence of those teachings.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course, to enjoy the essence, yes.
Maybe we should be very clear. I know that we've talked about this through the panel discussion, but maybe we should be very clear about why we consider the teachings of Sri J. Krishnamurti such a huge paradigm shift in the religious sphere. Can you revisit that?
Yeah. You see, paradigm shift because all the, you think of a lotus or a hibiscus flower, which has got 8 or 10 petals, and in the center is the hollow. Now, that is the timeless, the spaceless ground of solitude and aloneness from which all religions took birth. The nucleus of any flower, if you looked into the nucleus of any flower, how mysterious it is, how very deep it is, deep and dark it is, right? Now, that's the ground of solitude and aloneness from which all the founders came, the great masters, because they were in touch with the divine. And but then you made a very mechanical thing of it, fossilized, very mechanical thing. And Krishnamurti has no affiliation to any religion. Krishnamurti has no affiliation to any nation. So he stands on the ground of solitude and aloneness. And he did not build a spiritual empire. He did not have disciples. So he's a very unique master. And he has brought something through him, something has come which is called self-knowing, which does not exist in the religions, because the religions are all saturated and obsessed with the divine, with the exception of Buddhism, which is supposed to be saturated and obsessed with nirvana, but it is not. Okay, that's a different story. So there is no self-knowing. Now the self-knowing, when you talk of self-knowing, the purists, the people who are the trustees of the various religions sitting in the citadels of power in the religious institutions, they may think that this is evil, but they don't know, because we are talking not of God but of the self, which is very difficult, and everybody is scared of the self. They don't want to touch it with the barge pole. It's a dangerous animal. But if you embrace that animal and you say that I am that animal, and then begin to study it, begin to watch it, then the end of that boulevard is the divine, waiting in solitude and aloneness. And you will go there.
Every master had made that discovery for themselves.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
In solitude.
That is why they're masters.
And the teachings came from that.
Of course. From the ground of solitude and aloneness. And humanity has to go there.
I'd like to go back to the topic that Don brought up, and that is women, discrimination against women, and women's current role in the religious sphere, religious leadership. You mentioned that while the self of a man and a woman are very different, the Atma is one and the same.
Right.
The Atma, Christ consciousness, is one and the same.
Of course.
So how can self-knowing assist women in helping with this paradigm shift within our own religious faiths? And how might women's role begin to shift in the religious sphere with self-knowing?
See, Lamont, you've got to take note of the fact that because you are an incarnation of the divine, many people are looking outward for light and for deliverance. You're looking outward. You think a master, you think Jesus Christ is going to save you, or you think Rama or Krishna is going to save you, or the Buddha is going to save you, and you don't know that you're the light. Now, you have the master key in your hand,
Right.
and you're running helter-skelter to 10 or 15 places, searching for the key. Now, you're not going to find it anywhere,
It's in here.
because it's here.
It's in here.
Okay? And nobody but yourself can vouchsafe for you the freedom which you may want at a certain juncture in your life. By and large, you don't want freedom. You're quite happy to live in a prison if the prison is comfortable. It's a 5-star prison. Then you're quite happy to live in that prison. But if you become nauseated and sick and tired of that 5-star luxury, because that 5-star luxury is for this perishable body. But what about the soul, which wants to fly to the galaxies?
And
That soul has no freedom in that prison, right?
Right.
So that soul must yearn for that freedom. And then you must grant yourself that freedom. And you must begin the journey. You must take the first step, which is always a daring step, which is always an impossible step, and that will be the last step.
Nobody is going to tell you
Nobody is going to tell you.
to do it.
Your church fathers will not tell you. Your gurus will not tell you. And once you take that step, it's a daring step without any security, without any guarantee. It's a step into the unknown. And you've got to take that step. And lucky is the man who can take that step.
That's the most difficult step.
Most difficult thing. Because it's like jumping off from a precipice into the abyss of no time and no space.
thank you.
That's the
I asked this next question for those in the audience who may be very familiar with the Buddhist approach to mindfulness and how its focus is on the removal of sorrow. And J. Krishnamurti's teachings on self-knowing is more of a focus on awakening to sorrow. So can you speak for a moment about, from a day-to-day perspective, how the two are different and how self-knowing is, how it plays out in our decisions, our interactions with one another?
You see, right now, in our day-to-day life, if you see, the self is by and large, does not have energy because it is in conflict. It does not have intelligence.
All the energy is consumed
Is
in
consumed
dealing
in
with the
conflict.
conflict.
Enormous amount of energy is lost in conflict. So, because it's lost in conflict, you're not creative. You're not fearless. You don't have courage. You don't have initiative and you don't have intelligence. You're not doing novel and dangerous things. So Krishnamurti said, live dangerously. To live dangerously means you should not have the self. Right? Because the self is always looking for security.
Yes.
And as I told you, the Buddha's aim was to take humanity in the direction of nirvana. That's the direction given by the Buddha. But Buddhism has got obsessed with lower goals. And in some branches of Buddhism, they're even worshipping the Buddha. Even bhakti has become part of that, which the Buddha did not intend at all. So, because what the Buddha said is, every one of you is a potential Buddha. Come on, now work out your salvation. That was the teaching. But they're not following that, because for that you've got to commit yourself, you've got to give the thing. And mindfulness is a thing which you do. You write in your diary, today I did mindfulness meditation, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Then Wednesday I'm going to do from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., that kind of thing. So this becomes a new basket of wealth for the spiritual self. Okay? The material self, sick and tired of materialism, now abdicated all that and went into the spiritual kingdom. And there it is amassing. Again, it's amassing. It's accumulating something new. Now, and it's a thing which you practice. Now, you cannot practice Krishnamurti's choiceless awareness of what is, because the moment you practice the accumulation, the self becomes enriched. The whole idea is to divest the self of its structure and function, to divest it completely. And for that, you've got to watch it. How do you watch it? When you and your husband talk, your husband hurts you, then you've got to see how the self is smarting.
It's ready for defense.
Yeah, it's immediately going for defense. Then how it is hemmed in by fear. It is not taking all the decisions which it could take if it were courageous and fearless. So watch that.
At times it's also wallowing.
What?
Is wallowing in
Yes.
self-pity. Most people are wallowing in self-pity.
Self-pity, yes.
So you live a life of stagnation. You don't live a life of creativity. People who have come to the Atmic country, they live a life of creativity. They are fearless. They are daring, and they dare to speak the truth, and they are not afraid to get into trouble. Like Mahatma Gandhi, going to a prison 19 times because truth is more important. So Mahatma Gandhi said, "It is better to say no because of conviction than to say yes, either to avoid trouble or in order to please." That means it's out of the self. Because the self is seeking security. It is seeking safety. So none of that nonsense. So you got to come from truth. And you look at the founders of the religions, look at the life of Jesus. He spoke the truth, right?
Yes.
You got to speak the truth.
Yes.
Yeah. And without that, don't say that you're a Christian.
So for the pursuit of truth and self-knowing, you mentioned that there are 3 primary portals or points in one's life that we would be more open to this path of self-knowing.
Right.
Whether we're predestined to it, maybe early on in our life, or as an adult who may be encountering hard times, sorrow, tragedy, or if we reach the age of 60 and beyond, where we're just more spiritually inclined. But for those in the audience today who are not at one of those portals, what would be the lesson or takeaway you would hope they get from this session today?
Okay, you put me into trouble.
Yes,
Okay.
wow.
Okay, I like to get into trouble. Now you see, there are a lot of people in humanity, in the rank and file of humanity, where life is cozy and life is very peaceful and desires are getting fulfilled. And so long as desires are getting fulfilled and the self is not aggrieved, the moment has not arrived in its biography, when the self becomes aggrieved, when a thunderbolt of misfortune has landed on its head, then be a superficial follower of religion. That's good enough for you. That is, go to religion because you've got fear, because you've got desires, and pick up from religion whatever you can pick up in that materialistic condition of yours. That's good enough for you. Now a time will come when all that you have will be taken away from you. That's inevitable. That's the nature of life. Life is uncertainty. And so when that time comes, then the deeper, the more sublime spiritual life, which the great masters have spoken about, which is the religious essence in all the religions, you will start pursuing that. You will start pursuing that. And there are 3 portals as far as I have seen.
Yes.
Now, there could be 6 billion portals for 6 billion people.
Right.
Hmm? Because your trajectory is different from my trajectory, and your divine design is different from my divine design. So each of us have got a different fate. Our life is like a meandering river, which is going in different directions, passing through different vicissitudes. So you've got to be vulnerable to life, and you've got to see. And when you have a difficulty, major difficulty in life, now know that that's a blessing in disguise. That's very good for you. That's the best thing which can happen for you. This is good news for good people, bad news for bad people.
So, just we have very few minutes. If anybody have any questions, I would like to. Can you just turn it up? It's the last one. One moment. Yeah, 1 second.
Wonderful discussion, and I really enjoyed it. Namaskar. I have a little different view. Mamaivangsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. Each soul or each human being, he doesn't want to talk about human being, every living being is my fragment. And we know that.
Right.
Which is exactly what you're telling me. Then he says, Sarvasya chaham radhi sannivishto. In everybody's heart I reside. Now, if God is such Chit and Anand, that means He's truthful, eternal. Chit means aware and awakened, and Anand means blissful. So if we are His portion, we are also the same, essentially. Why we don't feel that way? The answer is because we have a Smruti Brahm. That means we have illusion that I am the body, and body's pleasure is my pleasure. And we are identifying and fascinated with body and sensual pleasures of the body. So it is the agnan or andhakar of me not knowing who am I. And that is why I think that my pleasures and my benefits of my body, I can hurt anybody, or I can hit anybody, or I can take advantage of anybody. The moment I come to know inner, which you are right, Tattvamasi, and I am the soul, and I am the part of the Paramatma, or part of the divine, the big divine, and I am the same. So it is like a Chidakash and Ghatakash. If it is a huge space, and a space within my small pot is me, when the pot, the body goes out, and the perception of me being body goes out, then I become the part of the huge divine. So I have a little tendency to say that we are not evil, but we are forgetting who we are, and that's why we behave like evil. And that is little difference or subtle difference between what you are saying and what I feel Gita says.
You see, you've got to go to another chapter of the Gita which deals with Devi Sampat and Asuri Sampat. And you've got both the divine energies and the demonic energies. And you know the Samudra Manthan model of Devas and Asuras. So all the Devas and Asuras are in your thoughts and feelings. And even when the self is a good Samaritan, the self can become a good Samaritan, it is still dangerous because it's divisive and it has got a sense of separation between itself and the rest of humanity. And that's where the trouble actually begins. Now, unless and until you actually migrate to the Atmic country and you come to the divine center and you know yourself to be the Atma, the life of the self does not come to an end. So the spiritual journey is all about beginning with the life of the self and coming into the Atmic country because the life of the self is exhausted. That's the journey. That's the journey humanity has to undertake. No, that's not an easy journey. That's an arduous journey. And the religions won't encourage you to go that far because if they give such a difficult goal, you will give up the religious institution and you'll walk away from that. Because you went to religion for self-gratification. Because you get some solace so that you will become materially more successful. You call that grace. The self, the ugly self, calls that grace. It is for becoming fatter and bigger and richer and more successful and all that kind of thing.
Hello, I am from Science of Spirituality, Satrajinder Singh Ji Maharaj. You are speaking our language, the language of love. I am so very happy today to sit here and hear you talk about doing the work of going within. Because like you said, the religious world tells us all about the outside and what's good and then blah, 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 blah. But to go within, it's hard. It's hard work. I am on that journey. And I thank you because you give me confirmation to keep walking.
Thank you for being serious.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste, I am Satya Kalra from Path to Anandam. And you mentioned that there is only one way, whether you give up and go on the God side, or if you keep both word and the God in both hands, then it's difficult to do it or it's not possible to do it. You have to drop one at some time in your life and move on with the godly things. Is that correct? I understood that?
No, ma'am, it's more like this. You see, all religions, whether it's Hinduism or whether it's Christianity, it exists in two tiers. There is a superficial tier which panders to the life of the self, which pampers the self, gives the self solace, then addresses its fears, addresses its desires, and tries to remove its insecurities in the material life. Now, there is a deeper, sublime tier of religions which deal only with salvation. They deal with moksha. Now, mainstream religion by and large does not, the sublime aspect of religion is not visible except in the lives of Hindu sages and Christian saints. In their lives, it is spectacularly evident, but in mainstream religion as such, it's not, because only the superficial layer is by and large glaringly visible. Now, most people in Artha and Kama, they say that they are devotees of this God, devotees of that Guru. Now, what that means is, your material life is continuing to have important priority, and your spiritual life is by the way. It is nominal. It's by the way. It's nominal. And you're very proud of it, which is itself a damn disgrace. Sorry to put it so bluntly. Now, you've got to know that this is not what religions are intended for. Religions are intended to take you back home to the divine. And that's an arduous journey. And it never even tells you that the journey is important. It never even rings a bell for you to telling you, come on, hurry up, come on, double up, come on, hurry up. Get there. So because they want you for their survival. Very sad truth.
Because I was a little bit got confused because Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita tells Arjuna that your salvation is by following your dharma, and right now your dharma is to protect the society. Okay? So you have to do all that, whatever is necessary to do it to protect the society. So living in this world is also our dharma, whether we are at home. And at home, I think Grasta ashram is the biggest, toughest ashram, the way I look at it is, you might not consider that, but I'm just saying, but I'm saying it's that is the living in a family life and still thinking about salvation, going through all the difficulties times. And what my biggest message from Bhagavad Gita is, wherever you are, you don't have to leave any place, but find your dharma, do the best of the best, whatever you are doing with love and compassion, with proper wisdom, for the benefit of the society. That is your karma yoga. And for that, wherever you are, you carry on. If you are in the family, if you are in the business, wherever, but put the best of your dharma right there.
Question. If you have
My question was, this is what my interpretation is, that I can't leave materialistic world, which is my family life, whatever, and to go for the salvation, because to me, my dharma is the path to go to salvation. And that's the way I look at it. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, thank you for asking this question, ma'am. You see, if you take the Bhagavad Gita, most of the teachers in India, they are using the Bhagavad Gita as a dharma shastra. For example, take this sutra which you quoted. Bhagavan Krishna, he's coaxing Arjuna because he's very reluctant to fight. Now he's in depression. And he says, I'm not prepared to kill my grandfather. And I'm not prepared to kill my Guru Dronacharya. And Krishna is coaxing him because Krishna knows the higher purpose, that this is a problem in macrocosmic society, not a problem in microcosmic society. And you have to act because it's your moral responsibility. He's goading him, he's coaxing him, he's inspiring him. Now, there are portions of the Gita which are Moksha Shastra. Chapter 2, for example, which deals with the Sthita Prajna Sutras. Now you have to become a Sthita Prajna in life. Now, to become a Sthita Prajna in life is a very, very important step. It may be the first and the last step. And the discovery of the divine after that is the second part of the spiritual journey. And so the Bhagavad Gita, it's like the DNA molecule. There is a Moksha Shastra, Dharma Shastra, and the two are intertwined. You've got to really sift and see where Bhagavan is talking Dharma, where Bhagavan is talking Moksha. Both are there. But okay, you can follow that, and a time will come when you will have the urge to come seriously into Atmic country.
So we have time for one last question.
So I had a question on your approach to understanding macrocosm problems in society. So it seems to me that certain problems such as racial oppression or gender-based oppression...
a little louder, please.
Okay, so in my understanding, gender-based oppression and racial oppression and other kinds of historical oppression like that, I don't understand how these sort of problems can be solved by what you call self-knowing. And you claim that macrocosm problems, the solution to that lies within looking at yourself in the microcosm, right?
Right.
I don't understand how those sort of problems, that seems to be cases where certain groups have oppressed other groups systematically, how those sort of problems can be sort of solved by looking at oneself. So if you could clarify that a little.
You see, look at the conventional solutions which are given: inclusion, reconciliation, signing peace treaties, then reservations in India for the backward classes and so on. Now, these are outer solutions. Now, how does the aggrieved party feel in his consciousness? He is still troubled, right? Now, should you not address that? That's more important, right? The suffering in the soul. And what is the use of saying that I will give you 500 acres that you can set up your community there, and actually you never do anything concrete to make them prosperous. You never really care for them, really love them, really inspire them, because it's a nominal thing you're doing because it's politically respectable, socially respectable, so that you can appease that community and you can get some votes in the next elections. This kind of a damn nonsense is going on. And you have got to shout and you have got to say that this is nonsense and this is no solution. And it's going on throughout history. And without the individual changing, the macrocosm is not going to change. Without you and me changing, you and me. Now, we think in our present state of ignorance that you and me, we are completely insignificant ants. Now, that's our perception. No, that's not true. So, you and me, we could be the gods who can change the world.
One last question, Guruji.
Firstly, thank you so much. I so appreciate the depth that you have spoken at today. I just had wanting to know whether or not when you use the term self, would it be reasonable for me to assume that that's comparable to the Western concept of ego?
Right. That is right, ma'am. It does not refer to the self, the Paramatman of the Upanishads. That is Atma or Paramatma. That is the big self.
Christ consciousness.
So we are already on about time. So thank you all so much for coming in.